Okay, good evening everybody, and you're all very, very welcome to Engineers Ireland this evening. So I'm John O'Sullivan, and I'm delighted this evening to be introducing a lecture on behalf of Engineers Ireland Civil Division with CIWEM and also with Engineers Ireland Water and Environmental Engineering Society. So it's a joint operation, if you like, and you're all very, very welcome. So we have a very, very interesting lecture this evening. And before I introduce the speakers, I'll just draw your attention to maybe some housekeeping. So we have two exits through which, in the event of something happening, we can leave the room. The first is on my left-hand side, and then the second exit is on the top right. That's the entrance that most of you would have come in this evening. Can I also just draw your attention? I think the coverage is very, very poor here, but maybe if I can just ask you to switch off your phones before we commence. So tonight's lecture then is on asset management in practice. UK and Ireland is going to present a number of case studies, and I'm delighted that we've got three speakers from Irish water projects largely that are going to give the talk this evening. So the first speaker is going to be Diarmaid. Diarmaid is an engineering graduate from UCC and also from UCG, working on asset management, so the management of Irish water and wastewater infrastructure on a day-to-day basis. Mark is also working on Irish water asset management, again in the management of the infrastructure on a day-to-day basis. Mark is a graduate of Trinity College. And then Orla, an architect from UCC, also working with Mark and Diarmaid on Irish water asset management projects, will be speaking second this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Diarmaid, and Diarmaid then will get proceedings underway this evening.
Excellent. Hello everybody. I have to admit this is my first time doing a webcast, so you don't know who you're talking to. So hello to you too, if you're dialed in. The way that we've kind of set up this talk is that there's three sections, and I'll go through asset management as a theory, as the approach, where it is in terms of its approach across the world, and then Orla's going to look at that within a case study of Highways England, and Mark's going to describe how we're doing it in Irish water. So that's the structure. So I'll cover what is asset management. But first I wanted to say why, and then I'll give a small bit of I don't want to take too much time with it, update on the development of an Irish chapter of the Institute of Asset Management. So why? Why are people talking about asset management? Why is asset management important? There's these three references here that are very linked. The ISO committee, which is the International Committee for Standards, created ISO 55000, the international standard of asset management, and they would claim that asset management is good for improving asset performance, asset value, manage risk effectively, and like it says there, enhance business growth and improvement, reliable decision making, and grow stakeholder confidence. But for me, the why, and it's a lot of it is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. If you think about the infrastructure that we build, it's there to provide the growth in economy, growth in society, and to improve or enhance the environment. Now, not all asset management is looking at all those aspects, but if you look at resource optimization, if you're looking for cost efficiencies, you're also going to, like for energy, let's say, in facilities, you're also going to reduce your environmental impact. So there's lots of benefits in realizing good asset management from a sustainability point of view. There's a very good article there, Integrating Asset Management Sustainability, about how the two disciplines are very related. So whole life cost of an asset. Asset managers are looking at the design, build, operate, maintain phase. So very well placed to utilize and get the best value out of our asset base. So to just break out from all of that and just to maybe play it out a little bit. If you had €100 to invest in your car, where would you spend it? Because I think we all do asset management. We're all kind of familiar with these decisions. Anybody can shout out, or I can keep going. So would you spend it on a fluffy dice, or would you wash it? So now imagine if you're traveling at 120 kilometers an hour and you suddenly have to stop. Where do you wish you would have spent it? Tires, yeah. Maintenance, brakes. So it's a little bit of a thought thing to really illustrate how asset management and managing assets is around risk, and they're fundamentally connected. So you're making decisions based on risk, and to minimize that risks, and the inverse of risk being value, because you value your safe commute home. It's the risk you manage to protect value. But when it comes to a large portfolio of diverse assets, priorities change over time, risk level changes over time, and the value that you need to deliver from those assets, for if you're in the water industry or if you're in Highways England, they change as well. So it gets quite complex because you've got lots of risk-based decisions to make. The car is a very simple one. But there is a key difference. Before I go into like what the approach is, which is set up by the Institute of Asset Management and ISO 55000, I think it's worth just going through what the difference is between managing assets and asset management. And there's the best way, this is a great article from, again, the International Standards Authority, or Organization for Standardization. And I think it kind of illustrates the kind of nuance of the focus between managing assets and asset management. So if you're managing assets, your colleagues will be focused on asset data, location, condition assessment, current KPIs, and department budget. But in asset management, you're focused on supporting information that supports decisions, appropriate information. So it's related to where you need to make your decision, to strategic context. Strategies to select and exploit assets over their life cycle to support business aims. So really, you're looking after the assets that you need because your customers need them, your stakeholders need them. Collaboration across departments to optimize resources allocated and activities. Your stakeholders are focused on costs. If you were managing assets, your stakeholders are focused on costs, current performance, response to failures. So maybe it's your business owner or your investor that's going, something's failed and you're not managing your assets. But in asset management, your stakeholders are focused on the triple bottom line and value. They want the clarity of the purpose of the organisation and focus on the impact of activities on organisation objectives. So are you over maintaining a road that doesn't have the risk? I think I'm probably straining some of your stuff, Orla, so I'll leave that one alone. But are you focused on your priorities based on value for your customers and for your business? And just to go on a little bit more, if you're managing assets versus asset management, your top management is focused on short-term gain or loss, departmental or individual performance, or savings, especially OPEX. However, if you're looking at good asset management in practice, your top management is focused on long-term value for the organisation, developing competence and capability across the workforce. So you're building your business to get the best value from your asset base to deliver the best results and objectives for your business. So your business has understood risks and is looking to mitigate them. And finally, think about the supply chain. If you're managing assets, your suppliers are focused on short-term contracts and performance, service level agreements, and that are focused on contract specifications. So it's really command and control. Rather than in asset management, your suppliers are focused on long-term contracts and or partnering relationships in support of client value and objectives. So you're thinking of your footprint as a business in a much wider, more partner kind of focused approach, and you're understanding that your suppliers are understanding your client strategy and needs in 5 to 10 years. Because there we go. So that's, I think, really nicely illustrates an important nuance when it comes to understanding asset management. So what is it? Sorry. First of all, I'd ask is, are people familiar with that diagram? Or is it something new?
I'm not.
No. So it's around for about 20 years, developed by the Institute of Asset Management. And the Institute of Asset Management would have come about because of, initially because of a number of tragedies, specifically the Piper Alpha tragedy in the North Sea oil platform, where a large number of people died. And the industry got together to look at how they were managing their assets and to ensure that there could be safe, reliable management of the assets to obviously avoid harm. And it grew into getting the best value out of the assets. Initially, that the Institute developed PAS 55, which was a British standard for physical asset management. In 2004 that got published, and then it got revised in 2008, and it, in some regulated utilities in the UK, it became a condition of their license to be certified to PAS 55. So it was a way to show that you were in control of your assets, you're managing them safely and effectively, and you're getting good value for your business and for your customers. And this model, the colourful one, comes from the Institute and it's developed. So what it sets out is 39 capabilities that you expect to see. Not all of them, but they're a good part of what you'd expect to see when you're managing an asset-intensive business. And the complement to that, if they're the capabilities, the glue to kind of bring those capabilities together as a business is ISO 55000. The standard published in 2014, it superseded PAS 55, and really the two of them together is what it takes to build out an asset management versus managing assets type of business. So the glue is ISO 55000. There's a quick snapshot of the range of subjects, and it really, you can see from looking at it, some of them are disciplines in their own right, most of them are. So asset management is very much an interdisciplinary or discipline of integration. It's not just an engineering discipline, it's a finance discipline or complements your financial disciplines, change management, supply chain. It's got information management, data management. I won't go through them all because I'm conscious I'm probably gone over my 10 minutes already. That was kind of just more or less saying the same thing. Everybody has a different view of what cost is and performance and risk. Like if you're an environmental regulator, you might be mostly focused on risk and you don't really care about the cost. But you want your assets to deliver to a certain quality, but your economic regulator mightn't really be looking at that, and it's got to push down the cost lever. So it's really trying to get a balance of those three things: cost, risk and performance. And because of all the different disciplines involved, they'll have different views as what each of those mean. And they change through time as well. So nearly there. People are at the centre of how we develop asset management capability. This is this definition of asset management from ISO 55000. Coordinated activities of an organisation to realise value from assets. However, it's really people. Businesses don't create value, people do. So it's by bringing people together with the right capabilities and building that together in the right way to deliver good asset management. So that's a little bit on theory. I won't go through any more, and then I'll hand it over to Orla in a bit. Just want to give a short, brief update on the development of an Irish chapter of the Institute of Asset Management. So the Institute is working to be recognised as a leading international professional body for asset management. Since 2016, there's been about 5 knowledge sharing events across the country, and these are the names of the people that have been helping to coordinate it. But it's very open, and so please get involved if this is an area that you're interested in. The aim for the Irish chapter is to share best practice, promote good asset management across Ireland within all sectors, anything from engineering to finance to business leadership, so on. And so if you are interested, please come and talk. It takes a lot of effort to get a voluntary group going, but having said that, we've had 5 really good sessions since 2016. So thanks very much. If any questions afterwards.
Thanks, Diarmaid. Okay, so Diarmaid mentioned and kind of introduced the 6-box model concept, and that's something that not everyone has seen in the room. So just to show you what I'm going to focus on now, it's really very much looking at the kind of strategy and planning and asset management decision making across businesses. So the 6-box model really simplifies organisations into these kind of large sections, but what it's trying to do is basically show how all of the parts of the organisation need to feed in to make this model work properly. And each is relying on the asset information, which is kind of the underlying need that we have at the bottom of the business. So what I'm going to do, as I said, is looking at the strategy and planning and the decision making. And this case study for Highways England is really showing you how we work to develop asset management plans. So looking at asset management planning within the organisation. So Highways England in the UK basically breaks up the UK road network of A1 roads and motorways into areas. And basically there was one area, Area 7, which really led the charge on developing asset management plans for the UK and the Highways Group. So just to put this in context, Highways England, where they were when we started out, very much felt like they didn't have a good insight and didn't have much control over how they were managing their asset. The way they had set up the maintenance contracts was that they were long, time-bound contracts that mapped out basically a condition that was required across the network, and then works would be delivered to achieve that standard. What they were looking for was to get a better understanding and control over how their asset was being managed, over what was being done, and over the value that they were getting out of their asset. So they were looking to be that more intelligent asset owner. As they said themselves, they wanted to have a reasonable level of data to enable them to make informed decisions, to decide what maintenance or what renewals needed to be delivered to make sure that they were delivering to their customers. And it was really about bringing them back to the focus of the customers and making sure they were delivering the quality their customers required, managing things like reputational risk across the organisation overall. So one of the big focuses was what they realised is the investment that was happening across the asset, and the maintenance and repair was very much reactive. If a bridge fell down, they put it back up. They didn't anticipate things happening, and they didn't have that foresight to enable smaller repair works and usually less cost and less inconvenience to their customers. So this is something that they wanted to work towards. There had also been a large period of underinvestment across the asset base. They'd been because they were government funded at the time, there hadn't been enough investment, and it meant that they had really stretched and focused on kind of the key assets rather than the overall kind of fence-to-fence asset base. So including like the drainage, the geotechnical, and all the outside assets that actually have quite a large impact on the surface overall. So to give you an understanding as to how big this project was, so we did an assessment, and we basically developed asset management plans over a 5-year period, and it identified, based on a pure needs basis, that the asset base actually required over 133 million over a 5-year period investment. Now this was over 3 times what had previously invested across 5-year periods in the AMP. So it was in real need for investment and for informed decisions to be made on where this investment was going to happen. So what did we do? Basically, Highways England ran a competition to figure out how they were going to make asset management plans. They didn't have a full database of information across the condition and the performance of all of their assets, so we were very much starting from scratch. Now, they did have some condition data, and that was really where we started, was to look at what they had and where we could extrapolate the data points that we could see, extrapolate the condition that they could see, but working very, very closely with their team of engineers and our team of engineers. So we had an engineering specialist for each of the asset classes, so the pavements, the structures, the technical, etc. And then they were basically paired with a Highways England representative who had that inside knowledge into how they had managed the asset previously and what the best condition or other data was available. So when we looked at all of these condition data, basically what came out was a need for a huge amount of intervention. So this was purely based on the need of the asset. And as you can imagine, if you go through your assets, it always needs a lot more than you can afford or that you're actually able to deliver. But doing that exercise to understand the scale of the need was really beneficial for them to see actually the level of investment that would have to happen eventually over the longer term. So taking that list of interventions across each of the asset bases, as you can imagine, there was thousands of projects that were needed to be done. And all of these are grouped together into lists of schemes. And when you put them all together across all the asset bases, we then did an exercise of rationalisation. So the rationalisation basically looked across all of these things that were required and said, well, okay, we need to do 10 schemes across the M50 over the next 5 years. Well, is there a way of logically bundling these up? So if you're going to be investing in your pavements, if you're going to rip up your pavement and put it down again, while we're there, should we do the drains, close the M50 every night for the next 2 weeks, or whatever is required, and making sure that we're not coming back a year later and digging up the same section of road, or working on the sidelines. So also making it safer for the people working on the road, to actually enable them to do their work, do it efficiently, and get out of there and not come back for 5 years. So that was one of the big aims, was really reducing that safety risk for people on the ground, on the sites, and making sure that it was safe for them to be there, and they only had to be there for the minimum amount of time required. The next thing we were trying to do was also reduce the number of road delays. So as I said, the customers were really becoming a huge focus for Highways England at this time, and trying to get that public perception that actually we're only going to delay journeys to our road users when we have to. So really reducing the amount of time that we're on the network and reducing the number of times we're coming back to the network was a huge focus. And then also things like looking at the long-term need of the asset. Is there anything that we can delay? Is there anything we can fast track to make things more efficient? And then finally, having all of this information and this view of the future of what we needed to deliver was enabling them to have less unplanned failures. So we knew that the bridge was going to fall down in year 29, therefore we were in there in year 28, doing the maintenance and repair work to make sure that there was less of a risk to the public and to the customers. So just to go to take a step back and show you kind of what this looked like, I've just got a sample of some of the data that we were looking at. So the graph at the top is really simply asset inventory. It's the number of geotechnical assets that were held across the asset base in Area 7. So, things like grading, embankments and cuttings. These are all sitting around the network, and we've got the numbers of them. Now, simple, but not necessarily always something that's easily achievable and to hand in an organisation. So working to get that was a start. Step 2 then was we basically looked at each of these asset groups and said, well, actually, how do you measure whether this asset is working correctly, at risk, or needs to be replaced? So we worked with the engineering specialists to figure out actually what did high risk mean, what did low risk mean, and what was severe. So this meant that we had a category for each of the asset bases, each of the asset groups. And then looking at that, we basically categorised what we could see across the network. So for the geotechnical assets, most of the assets are sitting in the medium category, which is okay. But ideally, if you're looking at you should be seeing an even spread across the different conditions of your asset, because some of the things will be repaired and replaced in the near future, so they could be at the lower quality, and then some of the things should be at lower risk because they won't be repaired for a longer time. So based on this risk assessment, we then mapped out the interventions that were required over a 30-year period. So this is, again, purely needs focused. So it's huge, and it just gives that overall insight into what they're looking to do. Now, applying a funding constraint is an easy thing to change. So that was the next step that we then moved on to figure out actually what we could deliver. But this is where we started to see the overall need. So then, just to give you another example of the type of things we were looking at. So for the pavement, so this is the main asset, obviously, on a motorway. Looking where they're currently standing at the moment, I appreciate this is kind of a busy graph, but I'll try and make it simple. In that, if you look at this first few years, the graph is mainly green. So most of your asset is sitting in the green category. Now you might think, okay, that's great. It's really good. It's all in good condition. But actually, it means you're potentially over managing your asset and you're over investing in the pavement. When you could leave the condition deteriorate a little bit, enable you then to do the replacement to bring it back up, and then allow you to invest in other parts of the asset base. So if you look at the black line, which is the investment plan, now this is the ideal investment plan, again, needs-based, and you can see actually over the 30-year period, by the end you've got a bit more even spread between red, amber and green. So that means you're just getting a bit more out of the life of your asset, and enabling you to realise its true value. So obviously, okay, the spikes in investment aren't realistic, but this is just where we started, and then we smoothed the curve to see actually where it could go for the highways guys in the end. Okay, so just to summarise, that was as far as I was going to go. So each asset class had a deterioration model exactly like these ones, and they mapped out the needs based for each of the asset groups. These are then bundled together into the rationalisation model, where we push and pull the levers to make things more efficient in delivery and to really reduce the amount of investment and time needed on the actual ground on the motorways. Now, one thing that made this really important, so in the UK, and I don't know if it's the same in Ireland, when it comes to motorway schemes, over 50% of the cost is due to traffic management. So even by grouping these schemes and reducing the amount of traffic management required, be it the cones putting out and the cones taking away, really reduced the costs. So they were getting serious value improvements straight away from actually doing this kind of rationalisation modelling across the asset base. So then on top of those financial savings, they also had the wider, more holistic savings, being the customer reputation, the user delays, and having that visualisation on the long-term need of the asset. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mark to look at the work we're doing in Irish Water.
Okay, thanks Orla. So I'm going to cover Irish Water's perspective on asset management. Our team in Irish Water in the asset planning section has effectively two roles. One is to take all the needs, similar to the highways example, take all that need, prioritise it into investment plans, and then ultimately tee up the plans to deliver all of our water and wastewater infrastructure investment, as well as to develop the asset management capability within the organisation with the team that we have in Orla and Diarmaid and a few others. And really what I'm hoping to get across this evening is that asset management is not something you can sell. It's not something you can project manage onto an organisation, certainly not in the Irish Water context. And it's something that you have to make your own. And as Diarmaid said at the beginning, there's quite a distinction between managing assets and asset management. And really what I'm hoping to do here is outline, I guess, the Irish Water context and what we're trying to do in terms of asset management. The approach that we're taking to it, which is, I think, probably just a little bit different to the traditional approach of applying a system or a change to an organisation. And the key capabilities that we are focusing in on within that development to make sure that it works, and ultimately then just the next steps and the lessons we've learned so far. I would start by saying that it's also a work in progress, so I guess we're as interested probably as everybody else to see how it works out over time, but certainly I think the approach we're taking is the right one for us at this point in time. So just to give a little bit of context to Irish Water and the number of assets that we're trying to manage, and the scale of the challenge that we have. There's 1.6 million households, 200,000 businesses. We've got to achieve €500 million worth of OPEX savings. We've got already, to date, we've identified, similar to what Orla outlined in the Highways Agency, there was no place you could go to and say, well, what is the state of all the assets? But so far I can say we've identified over €13 billion worth of need in asset investment and maintenance and operations activities over the next number of years, and that's the stuff we've found so far. We have an extensive water and wastewater network, over 63,000 kilometres of water main, 32,000 of wastewater networks, and you can see the volumes there of water and wastewater that we're producing and treating on a daily basis. So the range and the scale of the assets we have, the challenges we have, is huge. So really, I guess when you bring an organisation like Irish Water together, and you start bringing people who are enthusiastic about the topics and the things that we have to do, one of the things we have to be careful of is that we plan in a coordinated and prioritised way. We know there's so many problems, we know we need to get on with them, but what I'm going to show you now, I think, is what potentially can happen if you start from an area of enthusiasm and understanding the need and want to just get on with the job. So this is an example of a wastewater treatment plant that a couple of you might recognise anyway. And really it's an example of where we had, if you look at the HSQE labels there, we had issues around site security, we had issues around hand railing, so from a health and safety perspective, we had things we needed to address. Our process optimization team looked at the aeration system in that wastewater treatment plant, and there's an opportunity to make it more efficient from an energy perspective and also from a treatment process perspective. You can see that just in the bottom right hand corner, some of the mini pillars and control panels need a bit of TLC, to say the least. And we all could go at the problem and the multiple problems, but all do it independently. And really what we want to try and achieve is that we know what we're here to do, what the priorities are, and we go about it, and again, as Orla described, in a kind of systematic way, that we're not down here fixing one problem this week and another problem next week, that there's a consistent plan and sequence of events that achieves the best value out of the assets, but also minimises that risk at the appropriate times, so you get the right balance. So looking at the Irish water landscape, we quickly realised that there's a lot going on in Irish water, and that the kind of traditional approach to overlaying asset management in the organisation wasn't appropriate. There's a huge volume and rate of change of organisational change within Irish water. We have 31 local authorities managing the assets. We have contractors, we have consultants, we have our own teams, and trying to coordinate all those activities in a seamless way is not going to happen overnight. There's a large overlap, as per the previous slide. There's a large overlap between the different programs and initiatives we're undertaking, and the priorities can change. So weather can change, like the drought we had this summer, the storms and the snowstorms we had last winter, flooding, water quality, wastewater quality challenges, or regulatory context can change, political context can change. So a lot of changing priorities and external factors there. And effectively what looks like a large startup organisation of engineers and asset management professionals coming together. So there's a lack of a well bedded in baseline management system. So really what we started to do is look at where Irish water was, where it wanted to get to, and the gaps that we needed to address initially, and recognising the fact that there's a lot of change programs and a lot of things that Irish water and the water industry has to do over the next number of years that we can't interfere with. So what you see here on the diagram is really the recognition that this project to embed asset management within Irish water has to recognise the things that are going on, see them, and adapt to them, but not interfere with them. But it can help some of those other change programs, and vice versa. And really we have to work in parallel with all those other change programs to embed what we need to do. So the typical project management approach, as I said, wasn't going to work. We needed something that was agile, something that could deal with all the change, and we weren't trying to do asset management onto the organisation. We set up a small core team that's within the organisation and really provides as the kind of the steer, knows where we want to get to on asset management to get certified by 2021, but provides a steer to all the professionals working in the field and the water and wastewater areas on how to align those to an asset management way of doing things. And I'd say it's been pretty dynamic over the last 2 years at least anyway, where we constantly trying things, checking in with the organisation, seeing how real it is, that it's not something you sold this system and now we've got to justify it. It's actually going, does this add value? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And I'd say one of the features of it is really a really regular communication and catch up, both within the project and within the core team, and then outside in the organisation, so that we're connected and not disjointed or irrelevant to the organisation. As well as the third thing there, just building the bird's eye view. We did that at the very beginning. We kind of got a flavour of all the different things that are going on in the organisation, so that we would regularly pick up on areas where the business has a problem that needs to be solved, and maybe we can help it out, or maybe it's an area that we hadn't had in our work plan, that we need to maybe accelerate our efforts on, but to also understand the ones that are going on to make sure we don't disrupt them in any way as well. So with so much going on, and bringing, I guess, new cultures together for the first time and trying to embed a new way of doing things, we also really have to try and set some foundations. And what you see on the left is, as Diarmaid and Orla presented already, is the kind of the bones of the asset management framework. But as we start to make it a little bit more applied and a bit more real for the organisation, so starting to say, why are we doing this? Well, it's because there's a strategic objective. There's a water services policy statement that has come from the government. There's a water framework directive that's telling us, we need to be sustainable in these areas. There's an energy requirement on us to achieve energy reductions. So that's the reason we're doing things. And that sets our policies, which is the level 1 and 2 policies you see there in pink. And then we develop our strategies and objectives and plans from those. When you have us coming together in the first instance when Irish Water was established, we knew those were all the things we had to do, but we didn't set them in a framework or a context. So now we're saying this is why we're doing it, this is what comes next. This is the sequence of things that set out what we do every day and our priorities, and that informs how we make decisions. And the next, just on the right hand side then, is you can have all the document hierarchies and structures and frameworks you want, but as Diarmaid said, really what it adds value is people in this situation. So everybody has to know that they've got a role to play. And while I'm the asset planning manager in an asset management function, we all do asset management. So for everyone to understand on the right hand side that the strategy and planning piece that Orla described is maybe primarily at a point in time driven by an asset management function with intelligence gathered from the teams. At a certain point in time, it comes to actually building the thing, maintaining the thing, or operating it. So the balance of effort and contribution changes through the cycle of the asset, and we had to spell that out and really make sure that everybody knows that there's a place for everybody, and that together, effectively like a relay team, we'll achieve the objectives, not independently. So we set up ourselves to have, for the first time, structured strategies, plans, policies, things like that, and then we put the organisational structures in place to make sure that we could effectively grow into those, while trying not to bore people, and hopefully I haven't so far, but on that this is a system, and as I said, you can't sell the system, you have to make it real for people. In addition to setting up the systems, we wanted to nurture and develop a culture around asset management. So we've actually developed a number of training programs and put a significant number of staff through them. So we have a 30-minute e-learning module, which pretty much everybody who's, I think at this stage, joiners now to the organisation go on. We have a 1-day classroom foundation course. We have a 3-day classroom certificate and a 7-day diploma. And we've had huge uptake particularly on the introduction to the foundation, and a number going through for the certificate and the diploma. And really in the last year, you can feel the difference. People are talking a similar language. So we all came from different backgrounds, from consultants, contractors, local authorities, finance, customer operations. And it brings together, when we're starting to talk about, when a common understanding of what risk is, that balance between risk and cost, people are now on the same wavelength. So even though the framework may be a little bit alien still, the groups that we've set up, maybe new, what we've got is culture developing within the organisation. What we're trying to do now is pull it all together. So we've got input from across the business. We've had thousands of hours in workshops and various things trying to make this real and apply to the job. But we're really trying to put it together now at the back end of this year and next year, embedding it in everything we do. So really on the left-hand side, you've got the framework and the different documents. This is applied to water conservation. So we have a clear water services strategic plan to priority to reduce leakage at the top. We have a policy that reflects that strategic ambition. We have a strategy in draft now at the moment that says how we're going to go about it. And we have specifications that support that agenda. So our specifications for metering, for telemetry, for pumping systems, all geared with a little piece of leakage reduction within them, to make sure that when you put all these assets and functions together, they deliver leakage reduction. So standards to support those, and we have asset management plans to support those. So you have the whole range of asset management components there on the left. We've applied that to the people on the right, and what we're establishing now is the stewardship groups you see there represented around the 5 major cities. And this is really starting to bring the people together. So what we have now in the Greater Dublin area is we have people from customer, from finance, from connection developer services, from asset management, from operations, all coming together and actually looking at the plans we've made and helping us correct and set the direction and trying to find that balance that Orla outlined. How much is too much OPEX and how much is too much CAPEX, and have we got the right measures and are we achieving our strategic aims? Do we need to change direction? And I think the feedback from those sessions has been amazing because it's actually bringing everyone together to, as I said, everyone now knows that they have a solid role in this asset management thing. It's no longer theory, it's actually sitting in a room, solving problems together and setting our course together, led by those policy and strategy directions. I won't try and explain this, but what I will say about it is really, if you start from top to bottom, where it says start, that's our policy and strategy, kind of what are we trying to do? Reduce leakage, reduce energy. And we put all those needs in at the top of the hopper, which is the kind of cone-shaped hopper thing that we have there. And at the bottom, we're trying to make asset management plans in green. When we make a plan, so that the asset planning section has a large role to play in that, but it should be that when we make the plan, that the finance people go, that's good, that's hitting our targets for CAPEX and OPEX. That the operations people are going, that's got rid of my headache, that's the right plan to make, that's going to make, from a customer point of view, our customers happy. And in the green box there, we're really getting the whole organisation saying, this is the right plan for Irish Water and the water industry. What you see then after that is the cycles we go through. So if you look from left to right along the bottom, you see it's gone from left to right. This is strategy and planning phase. So that's where Orla describes what happened in the Highways Agency and what we do in my team in Irish Water. Then moving on to our delivery teams. So how do you go and design that? How do you build it? How do you get it on the ground? And then ultimately hand the keys over to operations in the operate and maintain phase. And potentially or ultimately disposing of the asset. And really what we want off the back end of when it's in the operate phase is to understand how the thing we've built is still working. Is it causing headaches? Has it solved headaches? And we want a feedback loop, which is the orange line back over and up into the hopper. So if we got it wrong, there's a feedback loop to say, we got it wrong, which is what the stewardship forum and some of the other groups of people that we've brought together, you bring it into a group maybe to solve a problem, it didn't work because, why didn't it work? Go solve that, come back, and we feed that back into the hopper again, into our standards, into our policies, into our specifications, and make sure that the problem gets designed out over a number of cycles. That's all great for the few people, or quite a few people who are involved in the various groups that we have, and the people who are closest to defining the problem, creating the solution, costing it up, delivering it, and operating it, but it's confined to a number of people within the organisation. What we need to do, so that you can have new joiners, that you can evolve this over time, is need to manage knowledge around that. And again, probably one of the more, I think it's kind of a unique thing we've done in this. So we've got an online wiki, Waterpedia, which, as we develop all those documents and standards and things like this, this effectively becomes the go-to place where, if you look in here and you're looking at the treatment process, the functional specification requirements homepage tells you about the function, the scope of it, how it aligns to policy and strategy objectives, ultimately how you build it, what it looks like, and all the things you need to know about that function, whether it's a water treatment process, a metering process, whatever it may be. So we have this for all the different functions that water and wastewater services require, and it allows people to navigate their way through. So I want to know why we're doing something around water treatment. I want to know how to do it. I want to know what groups. I think down the bottom of here somewhere we have, Liam would know best how to navigate around this. But you can literally navigate your way through. So it's a real teaching aid, but also on-the-job learning aid. So when I come in on Monday morning and my mind is blank, and I want to remind myself about how all these things work together. It's a brilliant way of going in and navigating through what we do and how we do it. Ruined your animation, Diarmaid. So I hope this is giving some sort of flavour of the bits that we've put together. They, on their own, between documents, the asset base that we have, all those thousands of kilometres of water mains and so on, between the groups of people we're bringing together, and the different pieces, the complicated V model that was up on screen there a second ago. Individually, they look complicated. They do require a bit of getting into, but when you pull them all together, they form a really effective organisation that can achieve its objectives, deliver outputs, and we like to call it the pyramid with the steering wheel, with everybody's got their hands on the steering wheel and able to adjust the course we take. But it's really what we're trying to do now is make it real and get that culture and the discipline of behaviours in, so we know what we're supposed to do, we know how we're supposed to do it. Are we actually living the values and doing it in the way we're supposed to achieve our objectives? So at this point in time, we are definitely making progress in the asset management journey. We've moved from innocent, we're into the aware and developing stage. And really to get certified, we need to get to competent. They're on our roadmap, basically. The key to getting there is people. We've developed lots of tools. There's lots more that can be used. But through that core team and being connected to the business and understanding its problems, so not talking about the system we're trying to peddle or sell, we're going to build this with the business. One of the things we've definitely realised that while we also wanted to get to the end and sort of say certified and everybody's doing asset management and this is an amazing culture within the organisation, a lot of the things, they are, like again that diagram, people have said it's too complicated and it's, but it's actually, some of the things are quite tough to go through, they're quite tough to embed, and the only way we can do it is bringing people together and making sure that we all get it and we all understand where each other is coming from. And if we do that, the benefits will be realised in time. So the tough things, there's a delay in achieving the benefits from those. It's definitely not linear, and I mentioned the type of problems we face, the rate of change we're facing. So we have to be agile and adaptive, and that's why in this context, certainly, and I think many contexts, applying asset management through that kind of core, that cell that we created, that small team within the organisation. We don't try and do this onto the organisation. I think that's the right way to start this. I would say in the last 2 years the engagement has been massive. I've never seen anything like it. The language has around the organisation is changing. We've got a common language coming together, and really starting to see this grow legs. So I think that core small team within the business, setting the direction, giving the steer, is something that will grow asset management over time and ultimately achieve the objective, which is to get certified by 2021. And really, to summarise, you can't sell this. The only way of doing it is to actually get in and do it. So that's the way we're going about it within Irish Water. Thank you very much for your time.
So thank you, Diarmaid, thank you, Orla, thank you, Mark, for what was a very interesting and informative lecture. So we have some time for questions. We're not quite off the hook yet. So what I might ask the three speakers to do is join me up on the stage for a question and answer session. And what I'm going to ask people in the audience, when you're asking a question, before you ask your question, for the benefit of those listening online, if you could just announce your name and the organisation with whom you're currently working, that would be great. Thank you. So we have some time for questions. Yeah, just stand up there. I think you can see on the screen, and I'll circulate. This first. So we have time for some questions. Can I invite somebody?
That's right.
Right, I'm going to start with a question if I may.
John?
Oh, there's two.
Getting started.
My name is John O'Dea. I work with Intel Ireland. First of all, thank you for a most interesting three aspects of asset management. It was super. The question I had, just it was right at the beginning, I think it was in Diarmaid's presentation, and you talked about kind of two elements. I picked up that the ISO 55001 was one. I missed the second element, and I was kind of keen to hear you maybe speak a little bit about why you needed both, or what was the working relationship between the both.
Okay. So the other one is the Institute of Asset Management have an anatomy of asset management it's called the Anatomy of Asset Management, and it sets out 39 subject areas or capabilities that asset intensive industries should really develop because they're key to delivering that value that we talked about. So that's the parts, let's say, and the glue is ISO 55000. And you really need both because you need to get good at stuff, but you could get really good at, say, risk assessment in your process optimization and, say, in water treatment. But if that's not connected to your asset planning, who are doing the capital investment, then that capability is kind of lost. The way it's connected is through your asset management system, ISO 55000. So really the two complement each other in that way.
Have we any other questions?
I should say you'll get the anatomy document from the Institute of Asset Management's website, just it's there available.
Sorry to walk all the way around the room. David Ball, hydrogeologist. Thank you for your interesting presentations. It's all new to me, so I was fascinated by it. Just a question, you're stressing the importance of people, and it struck me that in order to be able to carry out asset management, the people that you have need to be able to understand the assets that you have. Are you, well, another element of it is that about one of your assets is your water resources, your water sources, and about 3/4 of those are groundwater sources. Are you actually doing training programs to make people more aware of how to understand and manage those assets? Because from my experience, quite a lot of misunderstandings occur about how to use those assets, how they work, the natural resources upon which they depend. Have you got a big training program to sort of back this asset management?
Thanks for the simple question. I think that's one for me. So simple answer on training sessions is no. That doesn't mean we're not doing anything in that area. As you said, we have over 3/4 of our water supplies are boreholes. So it's a big feature within our asset base. And I think this summer has been it's really changed the way, and like Orla had a huge amount of input into the how we managed the drought with the local authorities this summer and the crisis management team. And what it really did was highlight what good management and good development of groundwater looks like and what maybe not so good looks like. So an understanding of groundwater emerged this year. I think that across engineers, people in the customer side, in operations, that maybe wasn't as widespread before the summer. What had been going on in the background was trying to develop, based on some of the guidance that you would have been involved in preparing in the EPA guidance out around boreholes, that boreholes are an asset and they have to be looked after and they have to be built the right way, they have to be operated the right way and maintained the right way. So we have spent, I think we reworked our frameworks, we spent a lot of time with hydrogeologists, with drillers, trying to develop a way that we can deliver and maintain the borehole assets in the appropriate way. So setting standards for what our boreholes should look like. And this summer, I think it was over 110 groundwater sources where things like camera surveys to assess the condition of them a group of hydrogeologists going out to assess the performance of the assets. Now I showed you the Waterpedia wiki there. We have a section on boreholes which says what good performance, how you measure performance of a borehole, how you know what bad performance looks like, how you know when to maintain it, and what do you do when you go to maintain it, and what do you do when you go to build one or replace one. So all those things have started to emerge this year. The frameworks for hydrogeologists and drillers to support that needs a bit more work. And ultimately what we're looking for is, I think we have now a whole load of, if I can call them converts to groundwater, and understanding that it takes time and science to develop and maintain and manage. But I'd say there's a much better understanding after the drought this year. And we have the kind of the toolkits and the supports there to build on. So that was the long answer. The short answer was no, we don't have a training course.
Okay, have we?
Hey, Dunya. Again, thank you for an interesting talk. My name is Shane Brody. I'm with MMA Consulting Engineers. My question is, in order to make decisions, you have to have good information, which means you have to have information about the assets that are being run day to day, pumps, motors, etc. And you have to have some assessment of those. How have you, or what tactics have you applied to try and gather all that information together, because you're starting from probably a mixed bag, to say the least, if any information at all. And Irish Water really want to know. So, and to what level then does that impact your asset management? Because you can't make necessarily good decisions.
Can I start? You maybe
you might know what to do a bit more. In terms of trying to get develop the data, or there would have been in, let's say, GIS. Michael, you probably have a better answer in more detail than I do. So there was data there in terms of models for the GIS, or sorry, for below ground assets, and so they were gathered and to inform some of the decision making. And then there's investment in data capture programs at the moment to again set out what we need so that we can drive better decision making. And then there's data that you can collect through your activities day to day, and you kind of like slowly bringing in that understanding through maintenance activities, operational activities. You probably have maybe a bit more.
Yeah, so there was data we could and did gather, and we gathered as much as we could, and we all knew that making decisions required good data. The other side of asset management, though, I think is that piece of risk and value, and it's also where you don't have maybe all the data to back up a decision, but when you're understanding, or you have an understanding of the risk that you can accept in a decision as well. So you don't have to have all the data to make a decision. A lot of the time you'd love to have more, but being able to have a decision-making framework. So you might know that a cohort of asset types of a certain age probably have this failure pattern, or or at the end of the life and need replacement, things like that. You may not have all the information on those assets, but you know that those are the ones that are going to fail first. So we need to, and they're critically important. So you need to go in and do something with those, which could be do a survey to find out the information, to find out which ones are the worst of those to target first. So we've a kind of a hybrid of taking everything we could get that was available, and then every one of our programs has a data capture piece of it, where as you get closer to building something or doing something, your final decision is far more informed and more accurate. And over time, that cycle will just, I guess, improve the decision making we have.
I think in some ways, what we're setting out in terms of people and groups is that there is a lot of tacit knowledge that's there through the local authorities that isn't in systems. But if we can leverage it through better collaboration, through more formal people and groups, like stewardship, is the idea that if we bring the different disciplines together, we'll have a more informed decision, and that's played out. So it's again like without the data, but with enough experience in the room and the right decision-making framework around risk, you can get along a lot of the way.
And one of the things we're trying to avoid is collecting all the data that we can possibly find. So one of the next exercises we're looking to do is looking at appropriate information and what information do we really need to enable us to make those decisions. So 2019 will be focused on looking at that kind of space and what information Irish Water longer term needs to collect and what that looks like and where it sits in the business.
Chairman Jerry Grant recently retired in the Irish Water. I suppose 5 years ago I became the first head of asset management at a time when the function didn't exist in reality. And I think the context for the whole discussion tonight is that it's an evolving discipline or series of disciplines within a living organisation that's making decisions all the time in the absence of many of these, if you like, fully integrated facilities. So, however, when you go back to 2014, 2015, there was a huge amount of legacy issues that were easily identifiable as being critically needing to be addressed. I think that the discipline of asset management comes into its own when you've resolved the most obvious things, the things that everybody can see, that are clear from the operational practices or clear from non-compliances. And now you're looking at a budget that you want to spend annually on a consistent basis, and you want it to reflect the best things you should be doing, so that you're keeping the organisation at the standard that you've set it at. It seems to me, therefore, that there is time to grow this, provided you take advantage of all the information that's coming through from the various programmes of work. And as you begin to filter out the really bad things that are obvious to everybody, you begin to make the next level of decisions that are going to drive the real value in terms of the long-term asset performance. I suppose the question is, when you get to that point in an organisation like Irish Water, it's certainly probably still 5 years away, but the point is you can't postpone this work. You've got to be building these systems so that the stuff that David Ball talks about, is being brought along. That's highlighted, for example, by the drought this year. Other stuff is highlighted by pollution incidents, by the leakage problem or whatever. All of them are throwing up, if you like, lists of things. You can only pick off the high-level ones at the minute that are really important to address failure to a large extent. Whereas what you want to do in the future is avoid failure or reduce the incidence of failure and become much more proactive in terms of what you're doing, so that ultimately the clients get a far better, the customers get a far better service, and the assets perform far better.
And ultimately what we're trying to do is deliver the tolerable risk level across the organisation. And at the moment, that risk level is very high because of the number of things that needs to be done. But over time, we'll be able to reduce that tolerance down because there'll be less fires happening across the organisation, and we can move on. And over time, that'll get to a sustainable level that's repeatable and predictable of where the maintenance and repairs are needed.
And just to add to that, I think, as you said at the beginning, it was everything that needed to be done was nearly presenting itself. Like every day was a new day, and there were new problems that we were tackling, and new ways of having to do things we're doing it for the first time. What you can see now, and I think that was the power of the first stewardship group we set up, was that when you're building all those plans in a kind of rapid succession, so one problem after another, you don't have time to actually sit down and say, there's the plan now, what can everyone else, as you said, when you're missing the information, what can people bring to your decision making where maybe data is absent? And that GDA stewardship group, I think, was absolutely amazing, because what we went in with for the first time was being able to say, here's all the plans we have made, because we got to a point 4 years in where we had taken all those needs, we had made plans, and we sat in a session with across all the different functions, and people were like, where's this and where's that? And it actually showed all the blind spots we had and corrected the priorities within the plan for the things that in an asset planning section or in an asset management section you couldn't do, but we had to do these things quickly, even for the regulators, and to make investment plans. But really the power has come out and the value has come out by bringing the people together and saying, effectively, this is our plan, and everybody shapes it, and it fills in so many blanks and makes it so much more valuable to everybody in the room. So I think it feels, I'd say at the moment, that we're just getting to that point where you can see patterns and themes of things that are going to repeat themselves, like boreholes failing or whatever it may be. They're going to come up. There's going to be a certain turnover of them every year, and understanding what those themes and that kind of steady state that we need to manage the best balance of. I think we're probably just starting to get into that now.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. Wojciech Krysa, Jacobs Engineering. I wanted to ask you whether you have completed a process of building your database structure. Have you identified the data that you want to collect to make your informed decision to make sure you are not comparing apples with oranges. Has that process been completed, and how did you identify the data that you really need and those that will just cause the data overload?
Probably can team up on this one again, but in 2014 there was Maximo was set out with data hierarchies, and the data definition and the requirements of data were done through workshops with business to develop data standards, which are used with the supply chain, and we've got our data capture programs that use those data standards, whether they be GIS and as what else. But having said all that, a little bit like what Mark was saying with, you got to get a business going. Like I kind of describe Irish Water as the biggest startup, which is like an oxymoron because startups are usually a small amount of people. But getting everything going, setting out the data requirements and getting it in the right structure was definitely done. But the next step, like you're saying, Jerry, is to improve on that and go back to why you wanted that data and link that data attribute to a decision that reduces risk, and really understand the value that you're getting out of that data investment. So you're looking at your data just like an asset. You go, what's my data asset going to deliver for the business? And if it's not in relation to risk reduction or value, then why are you getting that piece of information? Because it's going to cost you a lot over its life. So that's kind of the next wave where we will be setting out next year is appropriate information.
So it's an ongoing process under development.
Yeah, through the maturity of the business, where it gets into that steadier state, where it can, a little bit like the other example of looking back from your plans and going, where's the gaps? Looking back from your data. And I worked in Gas Networks Ireland for 6 years or so. 40 years, it's 42 years a company, and we started that process in 2013. It took about 3 years to go through that review of what data was giving us value, and then getting that data gathered and getting it into our systems. So yeah, it's definitely it's another evolution as a business, and it'll probably never end because you get into predictive analytics, machine learning, whatever else.
John Keane from MMA Consulting. Again, very interesting talk this evening, guys. Just kind of following on that question around data and data capture. So you've obviously had a lot of learnings over the last couple of years in terms of gathering that information from the existing asset base. How is that informing what you're doing for your very large capital investment in the future years? How are you incorporating those learnings into your procurement?
So between how we've incorporated maybe in procurement and how we've incorporated in the investment plan might be two different things. On the investment planning side, as Diarmaid mentioned there, there's you can go out and capture a huge amount of data, but maybe only out of the 1,000 pieces you collect, only 2 pieces are relevant for decision making. And if I give just 2 examples to maybe answer previous questions as well a little bit, if you take something like water treatment and the need to achieve good disinfection or something like that, there's one number that matters, and it's called CT. And actually, if we get a proper borehole that has high quality raw water in it, we need less chlorine and less time, which is what CT is, contact time with chlorine. So there's one number that determines whether we need to do something to improve the reliability and the quality of the water. So being able to categorize a borehole, and we have a categorization table for that, so different grades of boreholes have different, let's say, risk or quality associated with them. That determines what type of treatment we would provide. And similarly on the wastewater, you look at the load from an agglomeration or a town, and you look at what the environment can receive, and where one is completely out of balance with the other, then that drives your investment decision making to say we need a treatment plant here or we need a water treatment plant there because the borehole can't provide good water quality. So finding the piece of information that really drives the decision making. So for investment planning, I would say across water and wastewater, we identified a number of key pieces of data that allow you to make the right decision in the right place. It doesn't tell you all the detail you need to know to design it out and build it, so you still have to go through that, but it provides enough to say over here that treatment process is required because there's a gap and there's a damage to the environment over here. That borehole is not good enough. We need to refurbish that, or we need more chlorine. So from an investment planning point of view, it can be done at quite a high level, and there's a few key numbers that are required to do that. And we shouldn't collect massive information or procrastinate to collect it to try and make a decision when actually one or two numbers would do. On the procurement side, the same kind of, I guess, we see, as I described the hopper there, the same things that identified the need to do something. If we've identified 13 billion euros worth of need, then if there's 400 water treatment processes and 200 wastewater treatment processes and 1,000 kilometres of water main, that effectively informs your supply chain and your procurement strategy. So as we start to drop all those needs in the top, you start to see the patterns, the quantities, and the value of those. So now you can start to look at, as even just the borehole example, you see this somewhere now. There's 110 boreholes that need work. That's a good chunk of work for hydrogeologists, for drillers, for pump installers and people like that. So as you drop the need in, based on those high level numbers that you use to make decisions, I think it informs procurement and supply chain ultimately. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I suppose I was more, actually maybe my question is more around those plants that you were designing or the current designing. You know pump failures, you know what fails, or you're learning that from your day-to-day activities in terms of maintaining and how to effectively maintain those assets. So you're gathering that information, and how is that then informing your future procurement process in terms of how you actually capture that information again in the future?
Yeah. So again, on that, as we start to either in a planned way or as problems present themselves, we are capturing something of the kind of area of capital maintenance. So you're replacing a pump or you're replacing a component. What we see is we put that all into a database. So we look at problem, cause, remedy. So what was the problem? The water went out. What was the cause? Well, the fitting blew up. What was the remedy? New fitting. And then you start to build up patterns of, well, those fittings are always going, and actually we've replaced 900 of them this year. So we are compiling that into a database, and there are clear themes in the types of assets. I would say at this point in time, we're not down to it's this particular manufacturer in this context, or it's this make or model, or on the pipes, maybe things like that. We're probably saying, asbestos cement, 40 years old, is probably hitting the end of life. And we can see the evidence of that in places like Culáin and Kerry. So for individual asset classes and types, there may be, we're starting to hone in on which ones are really problematic ones, and for others it's just we're gathering kind of general, there's 900 of these a year, this is the type of thing, it's a motor, it's a pump, it's
more rule-based.
Rule-based, yeah.
One other thing we're doing, which is kind of more of a long-term plan, which is, Mark mentioned we're setting up these FSR documents, so they're functional specification requirement, and they're basically a home for all the specifications and standards that we're working to in Irish Water. And what we're doing is basically bringing the groups of experts together to manage that whole specification requirement world. So there might be 10 people in Irish Water who know all things pumping, and we make sure that those guys are in a room together looking at what we're saying, how we build things, how we maintain things, and how we operate them, and they're keeping those documents live, making sure that they're appropriate, and making sure that actually, if that Siemens pump or whatever kind of pump is always the one that breaks, let's change it and pick a different one, and that's our specification in Irish Water. So it's more of a longer term approach and something we're standing up. I think our first, we're calling them tech hubs. So our first pumping tech hub kicks off in 2 weeks. But the plan is basically we're going to group all the assets across the asset base and have these groups of specialists coming together to own them.
So that's the continuous improvement cycle. They'd also do the continuous improvement on the information required for the asset.
Okay, I think that's a good point to conclude this evening. So thank you again for taking the questions, and thank you for those that offered questions. Before we go, can I just hand over to Joe Kennedy from SciWem, our co-host for the evening, to offer a vote of thanks for tonight's lecture.
It gives me great pleasure on behalf of SciWem to propose this vote of thanks to the three speakers, Diarmaid, Orla and Mark. I'm sure you will agree that they made a huge effort to compress a very complex area into 3 relatively short presentations. As someone who jumped from the public service side of water into Irish Water, I think Diarmaid's slide, which kind of had talked about the balance between costs, performance and risk, is very pertinent from my past experience. Over a long period of time I jumped from highways, as Orla was talking about, to water, not always by preference and not always by choice, but at the whim of some particular individual up along the line, and my desire always was with water. But over a long period of time in public service, I noticed asset management was driven by performance, but a lot of the improvements were actually driven by risk, and we can trace this. My first big thing was fire prevention grew out at the start of this disaster in the 1980s. Then we moved into roads. Through pure neglect, health and safety became a very critical issue on our highways, and the first efforts at some form of asset management was done by the development of the National Roads, the NRA at the time. Then in the 1990s we made an effort on the water side first with water conservation to kind of bring some kind of forum into the water side, but unfortunately wastewater still remained the poor relation. And then we got into the noughties, and again it was health and safety again through a very critical bus crash, unfortunately, where people lost their lives, brought a huge focus on asset management for a lot of different organisations, and then moving into Irish Rail and Malahide, and bridges became, and again that developed a certain amount of asset management. In a relatively short time we have brought this Irish Water, and the lads have brought a certain amount of planning to the whole, and against a huge, people talk about data, and Mark referred to the data we have within our own control, but even on the wastewater side there's a huge amount of data that's in outside agencies that we're dependent on, and has a huge impact on the work we try to deliver. You know, so it's a phenomenal amount of data that has to be processed on a daily basis. Again, Mark's or Diarmaid's slide about the 39 capacities back over the years, it often depended on one person to have nearly all of those 39 capacities, when you actually, it's not 39 people, it's thousands of people you need to bring the whole thing together. So without much further ado, I would like to call on you to show your appreciation of the presentations in a normal way, but maybe the 3 speakers might forgive me if I also include in that vote of thanks to our former head of asset management, who played no small part, as Mark talked about, bringing people together, and that Jerry Grant maybe could be joined in the vote of thanks to Gwyn. So I would ask you all to show your appreciation in a normal way.
Thank you.
So thank you, and we just reaffirmed the vote of thanks for Jerry, and we wish him well in his retirement. I'm sure he'll be very, very busy. But that concludes tonight's activities. So again, thank you everybody for attending, and again just a final thanks to the 3 speakers on a very, very interesting talk. And we have a presentation actually tonight. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Orla.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Cool.
And
Thanks
you,
very
Mark.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.